I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the New America Foundation to this discussion of consumers' role in the smart grid. And I also want to thank you. This is a collaboration between the Energy Policy Initiative and OTI, which, can you give me the exact? Open Technology Initiative. Now, the Open Technology Initiative does a lot of work on broadband. They've put a tremendous amount of time and energy into this because, of course, this is a very important, the smart grid is a very important merging of broadband and information infrastructure with energy infrastructure. And we've also had a tremendous amount of help from Jerry Richmond, who has a lawyer who's been on sabbatical for the past year and has been really tracking smart grid initiatives over the past year. He has a wonderful blog that I suggest you check out. It's got many, many entries on consumers in the smart grid and tracking the policy initiatives. The address for it is Gerald, which is spelled G-E-R-A-L-D, Richmond, R-I-C-H-M-A-N, smartgrid, all one word, .blogspot.com. And this event is really a collaboration between these sort of three groups. Jerry has been working as kind of a special advisor to the Energy Policy Initiative. We're here to talk about the smart grid. We have 4 panelists. I'm going to introduce them very quickly. The first person at the end is David Owens, who is the Executive Vice President of the Edison Electric Institute. He's been involved in the utility industry for many, many years, trained as an engineer. We're very lucky to have him to talk about the utility perspective on this rollout of the smart grid. The next person we have here is Bob Lieberman. Bob is currently with the Regulatory Assistance Project, also known as RAP. He was formerly with the Illinois PUC, and also with the Center for Neighborhood Technology. He was CEO there for, I think, 10 years, and has a long experience both in regulatory issues as well as in kind of consumer and demand response initiatives with the Center for Neighborhood Technology. I might be using the wrong terminology there. The next person is John Howitt. He is a senior policy analyst with the National Consumer Law Center. And has done a lot of work recently on the smart grid and consumers' role or consumer issues in the rollouts of the smart grid. And the last person here is Karen Eberhardt Martinez, and she is currently with the University of Colorado at Boulder with the Renewable and Sustainable Energy Institute there. Before that, you were with ACEEE, and she was the very recent lead author of a study called Advanced Metering Initiatives and Residential Feedback Programs, a meta-review for household electricity saving opportunities, which I believe you can find on the aceeee.org website.
That's right.
Yes. And it's a very interesting study. It's the first really big study that I'm aware of on all the studies that have been done on consumer feedback and electricity saving. So now we'll start. This is just kind of a big discussion. We want to kick off these topics for discussion. We feel that there have been a lot of news reports recently about consumer opposition to smart grids or regulatory issues with the rollouts of the smart grids. And what we want to do is kind of delve a little bit deeper into this and look at whether these are just sort of technical glitches along the rollout, or whether these reveal some more fundamental questions about the structuring of how smart grid is being presented to people that we really need to address if we want to ensure the success of the smart grid. So I'm going to just talk very briefly about why we love the smart grid. The smart grid has this incredibly sort of united force behind it of utilities, the Department of Energy, FERC. It also has environmentalists are very excited about it. Some of the reasons for this are it offers a lot of practical benefits and environmental benefits. It promises to save energy by giving consumers an incentive to reduce their use at peak times. It sort of gives some incentive for doing demand response. It will save us money on building out infrastructure. It is also supposed to reduce CO2 and pollution by reducing peak loads on the grid at certain times. It also has some ideological appeal. For example, it's more of a rational pricing structure, and it gives people control, or if properly implemented, can give people control over their energy use and, in a sense, allow them to shop for electricity, which hasn't been possible. It also, another thing that lives up there is that it also offers a way of integrating green or renewable energy technologies, generation technologies into the grid. For example, if wind is being used is being generated in Texas in the middle of the night, this allows sort of a structure for people to use that at a discount. So it has this the potential to transform the sort of green energy structure. And it also has some big safety or infrastructure components, including that the grid could be self-healing. It could be more resilient to blackouts and things like that if you can more carefully control demand and supply, and you give consumers, you give sort of a set of incentives all the way through the system for people to change their response to current conditions. It has the potential someday to prevent squirrels from upsetting our electrical grid. I mean, one of the current concerns that we have is that a squirrel can end up in a transformer and sort of trigger blackouts in the right conditions. And that, you know, there's the possibility once you have all the back end equipment into the smart grid that this will be something that we no longer are particularly concerned about because we've kind of outthought it by computerizing the grid to a larger extent. Now, there are two things about this. One of the things is that the current and the federal focus of the smart grid is not so much on all that back-end stuff, all that back-end enabling stuff, but it tends to be on advanced metering initiatives. So the Recovery Act, AARA, is giving $4.5 billion for rollout of the smart grid, but that really focuses a lot on meters in people's homes. So a lot of what we're talking about today is meters, which is the consumer interface. One of the big issues in the smart grid is that consumers don't just need to like it. They actually need to kind of love it and embrace it and enter into some sort of partnership with their utilities to change their behavior pretty dramatically. And one of the big issues that comes up when you look at the studies is that apparently 3/4 of Americans have no idea what the smart grid is. And in fact, I talked to someone who works at the national, who works at a national lab in California. He's very, very active in energy policy. He said he had recently gotten a letter from PG&E about installing a smart meter in his home, and he just wasn't even sure what it meant. And if it doesn't make sense to an employee of a national lab who works on energy policy, we may have a problem. So one of the things that we're going to talk about is this sudden, what appears to be kind of a backlash to the smart grid. There is, for example, in California, which has 5.5 million smart meters installed, the town of Fairfax has recently passed a resolution preventing the utility PG&E from installing any more meters. And you also have people putting locks on their meters. It has a certain tea party flavor to it. People saying that they don't want their meter changed, and who knew that people had such affection for their old utility meters? Also, on June 21st, there was the issue with the Baltimore Gas and Electric Company, got one of the largest grants from the DOE for the Recovery Act, and they were turned down by the Maryland PUC in a smart meter request, and we're going to talk. That's one of the big issues that we're going to talk about today. In Texas, the utility Encore had to buy 900,000 smart meters, and when they found out that they weren't useful with the new standards in the state, they then attempted to charge consumers for them to the tune of $93 million was sort of passed through on their statements, even though most of them hadn't gotten the meters. So these are sort of the things that are bubbling up. You'll probably have seen news reports about them. There was another issue with Duke in Indiana and Dominion in Virginia. So we're going to talk about what's going on at this time. I'm just also going to quickly lay out that there's a number of regulatory issues, a number of regulatory agencies involved in the implementation of the smart grid: FERC, the DOE, National Institute of Standards and Technology, the state PUCs, and the utilities of all flavors and stripes themselves. And we also have kind of a pressure because there's so much money coming through from the AARA funds that there's a lot of requests are being made to state PUCs to okay smart grid proposals and rate adjustments for that. Currently, just a couple of figures before we start, we have about 150 million utility hooked up homes that are hooked up to utilities. We have 5% penetration of smart meters already. It's estimated that in the next 5 to 7 years, there will be 60 to 80 million more homes will be hooked up. And as I said, 75% of consumers apparently don't know what the smart grid is. So what I want to do is quickly turn this over to our guests. We're going to talk about two specific issues today. The first is the issues in California about implementation of the smart meters, and also, secondly, the issues with the Baltimore case in the regulatory issue over the smart meters. But to kick it off, I just want to ask each panelist to quickly tell me, is this a critical time in the implementation of the smart grid, or is it just sort of another time? And what do you think is at stake? Is the whole smart grid project at stake, or is something else at stake? And I'll start off with David Owens.
First, let me apologize for being late. I think the smart grid clearly is a game-changing technology. You asked me, is this a critical juncture? I would say, yes, it is. And I guess I would take the viewpoint that while there are some lessons to be learned in terms of educating our consumers about the benefits of the smart grid, I think there's widespread acceptability that this is a technology that will enable a lot of other technologies. Let me give you a couple of examples. Let me just amplify the list that was mentioned earlier about the benefits of smart grid, and then I'll talk more directly about why we need to make sure that we have a better customer education program going forward.
I'd like to talk about the second half of your statement in later discussions. We're really going to really get into that.
This is a critical time. It was mentioned earlier that $4.5 billion were set aside by the President and our new administration for smart grid rollout. Many companies are rolling out their meters. Some companies got a $200 million advance. As she indicated, nationwide, we're putting in about 15,000 to 20,000 smart meters a day. And the concept is this. The concept is that the meter, along with the intelligent grid, we're going to put sensors throughout our transmission system so that we can detect faults. So when the customer is out of service, we're able to know that that customer is out of service, and we're able to restore service much more quickly. We also want to be able to have the opportunity where the customer will be able to manage their energy bills and their energy usage. Down the road, that's what the concept is, where the meter will be able to communicate to appliances. And appliances that are heavy energy users, the customer will be able to make a decision whether they want to run those appliances 24 hours a day or whether they want to turn off those appliances when we have critical times of the day where energy is at its highest prices. The concept of the smart meter is that it would be coupled with what we call smart rates, smart electricity rates, where the highest demand on the utility system, energy prices would be much higher than what they would be in normal off-peak periods, and the customer would be able to make a decision about whether they wanted to subscribe to what we call these dynamic or critical peak load pricing approaches. So the concept is that the customer now is in better control over their energy management, better control over their energy bills, and that the grid and the meter will be able to enable newer technologies, distributive technologies, plug-in electric vehicles. This is a technological change, a significant change, and that's why I view it as a game-changing technology that will provide for more efficient energy use and at the same time greater control by the customer over their management of their energy use. So yes, it is a critical time.
Bob, tell us your sense of whether this is a critical time and whether the sort of the backlash that's being reported is significant.
Well, I think it's a critical time as well. And I think the critical point is that it's very, very difficult to engage with customers to explain what's going on and why this is a critical time and why it's important. I've watched utility after utility, particularly the large utilities in the Midwest that I know and have some affection for. I've watched them say exactly what you just said. We're going to give you control when prices are high. We're going to expose you to those high prices. This is not really a way to communicate with people. It's like, what's in it for me? You're going to show me high prices? The dilemma really is that what the smart meter begins to provide is a new business model. And the dilemma is, both on the company side and the state regulator side, is it's not clear they really want to go to that new business model. And I think we're caught kind of in the middle. And until that gets clarified, it's going to be very hard to get customers to willingly pay for a lot more smart meters.
John?
Hi, and thank you very much for the invitation here today. It's nice to be here. And just say briefly that National Consumer Law Center, by way of disclosure, is a consumer organization concerned primarily with the economic interests of low-income consumers. But we work hand in hand on this issue with a range of other broad-based consumer groups, Public Citizen, AARP, Consumers Union, and a host of others. And while I do believe this is a critical peak time, this is
For
a
which
critical
we will charge
time
you more.
Yes, we will. This is not a new issue for consumer groups. It's been a number of years now that large national consumer groups have been raising questions about the cost of new metering systems, related consumer protection issues, and the ramifications of dynamic pricing on different groups of consumers. I should say that over this period of time, we have been focused primarily on the metering end of smart grid rather than on the broader T&D system upgrades that many people equate with the smart grid phrase. But yes, this is a critical period. It's different now in that all of a sudden, I think the media and consumers are taking notice of some of the questions associated with the technologies that are being touted at present. That's a new and different set of circumstances that we're certainly very happy about. And as you mentioned, our funding and the rollout of new systems around the country puts us into sort of a new era. But I do think it's a continuum. The ARA funds amount to about $4.5 billion for new metering systems. In California alone, the commitments on meters alone are in excess of $5 billion already. And that's most of those commitments made excuse me, pre-ARA. So yes, we're at a new a juncture. The BG&E decision really could be a game changer here. And has gotten lots of attention. The California case we're going to talk about has, but I think this is part of a continuum.
When you say the BG&E case could be a game changer, why? Because it sets a new standard for dealing with consumers?
Well, you have a regulatory entity that looked $163 million or $165 million in federal money in the eyes and said, no, we think that there are risks and questions associated with the proposal that they saw, and we would like to hold off. The company can come back if they wish. I guess we're going to talk about
yeah,
this.
We're going to talk
bit.
about that. But that's something new. There haven't been, to my knowledge, any
as sweeping decisions on the technology and sort of the concept of smart metering as a whole. So.
Great, thank you. And next, Karen, can you talk? You've been working for years with people who really wanted to incentivize energy efficiency and demand response, and who've been like working in the trenches for years. And smart metering, in many ways, or the smart grid offers a huge opportunity. Tell us what's at stake in this juncture.
Thanks. Yeah, I think this is definitely a critical period, and I think that part of the reason why this is a critical period is because, you know, we finally have attention, we finally have funding from, you know, the DOE, we have interest from the utilities, and I think that it needs to, you know, if we're going to move forward with this, we need to move forward with it in a way in which we reach, you know, a critical mass relatively quickly for it to really benefit utilities and consumers on a broad scale, and the nation as a whole, to the extent to which it can. And I think for that reason, you know, this is a critical period. And it's very clear that what, you know, sort of the backlash against the smart grid has occurred because we've approached it in a way that we haven't brought in the American public. We haven't brought in the consumers in a way that really represents their interests, gives them the information they need, and provides them with just the, you know, the information where they are confident that this is actually going to work for their benefit. I think that when we talk about the BG&E case, you know, that is, it's not just the cost factor, that's clearly an issue, but the element of, you know, making this a smart investment for consumers, because when it comes down to it, consumers can manage their energy using a whole variety of tools. And, you know, smart meters are one way of providing feedback to consumers. But in our report, we talk about it as they're neither necessary nor are they sufficient. In other words, you can provide consumers with feedback without smart meters. It's probably, you know, smart meters are maybe a smart way of doing it, but not the way that they've been used so far. Because in order to really provide the feedback, additional technology is needed, and programs that engage consumers are required as well. And if, in fact, we do it in that way, then, you know, smart meters can be, in combination with these other technologies and programs, they can be a huge factor. And our findings show that, you know, they can actually save consumers as much as 9%, just the whole household. And this gets maybe too much into the technology, but our findings show that of all types of feedback, consumers could save 4 to 12% on average. The smart meters, combined with the right programs and in-home display devices, could have a huge impact and really could enable consumers to save energy, whether or not there are price incentives. There are other ways to incentivize people, and whether or not they have automated, you know, dishwashers or washing machines. In fact, consumers can save energy in a whole variety of ways. And I think that I'm going to end here, but I think that that's a really critical point here, is that up until this point, you know, most utilities and a lot of other people too are thinking about the ways in which smart meters and in-home displays and that kind of feedback can, you know, encourage people to shift their use from peak to non-peak, or to reduce their use through the use of new technologies. And what I'm saying here is, yeah, those are possibilities, but the range of possibilities is much wider than that. And there are a whole bunch of things that people can be doing, even if they don't have the money to invest in some of these nifty gadgets.
Great. Thank you. So now you have a sense of what's at stake. I'm going to sort of quickly dive into what's going on with the PG&E case, which is not a case, the PG&E issue in California, the so-called backlash, which caused the town of Fairfax to outlaw the smart grid. I have to tell you, Fairfax isn't very big, so... Anyway, as California has spent $5 billion on installing meters, and I believe in Northern California, PG&E has installed the meters in 5.5 million homes. They're expecting to install them in 9.8 by 2012. And what happened was early on this year, there were 1,000 customer complaints. And there were complaints also from prominent members of the California legislature. And at first, PG&E described these. PG&E was later encouraged by the PUC in California to release all of its paperwork on this. At first, the PG&E kind of reacted to this as negative press. But as things sort of started to balloon and more TV stations covered belligerent Americans standing in front of their meters and saying they were going to protect their meter from PG&E, things started to come out. And there was a PUC hearing in which it came out that there's a problem in at least 1% of the meters that have been installed, probably about 50,000 of them. 9,000 were not communicating well with the utility. 11,300 failed to work. 23,000 were improperly installed. There's also been a lot of questions about inaccurate bills and overcharging, although there's a disagreement about what that actually is. And one of the issues that came out in the paperwork submitted by PG&E was that they had at different times had scheduled letters to go out to customers before the installation, and sometimes they had actually canceled them. And when they decided to restart the letter program, it was going to cost $500,000. And they are now, I think, quite actively doing pre-deployment letters. But what I wanted to talk to John and David about quickly was, is this an issue of poor implementation of natural glitches in the installation of new technology, or does it reflect something more fundamental? I wondered, John and David, could you talk a little bit about some of the technical issues that happened in the PG&E issue? John, why don't you start, and then David...
Fair enough. Well, I think these problems... the rollouts in California are relatively, they're recent.
Is your mic on?
Can folks hear okay, all the way in the back? All right. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we're dealing with new technology here, new communication systems, new utility data handling systems, software applications. We're dealing with meters themselves without the benefit of experience that is associated with analog meters. However, even above and beyond the newness, we know that the average meter installed by PG&E, the shelf life, we're looking at around 15 to 25 years, as opposed to an analog meter with a much longer shelf life. And I think technologically, this isn't just a problem with newness. It's certainly not just a problem with communication. There are other problems as well that are fundamentally associated with the technology. You didn't mention that what may have contributed to the ordinance in Fairfax. Does anybody know what happened in the PG&E territory about a month ago? Well, how many people here, let me just ask, are aware of the fact that with an advanced meter, with a smart meter, the utility has the capacity to remotely disconnect that meter? Does everybody know that? And I was shocked to learn in a meeting with a government official who will remain unnamed, who is involved with the disbursement of monies associated with this technology. He was not aware of this. Well, a month ago in California, there was a remote disconnection in a household a household that was behind on their bills. There was a fire, a candle fire, I believe. 4 children died. So there are consumer protection issues, there are customer notice issues, there are capacities associated with these technologies that bear scrutiny and that people need to understand before making a decision about whether to embrace this system. So I'm rambling a little bit here and don't want to take too much time, but this is more than just temporary glitches and lack of customer education, though that would help as well.
Okay, David.
Okay, let me kind of structure my comments, if I might. And let me address 4 issues. Smart meters are new technologies. Traditionally, with any new technology, you may have some initial glitches. A 99.9% accuracy of the meters, I think, is pretty good. In the PG&E case, I don't think that there was any disagreement on the part of the company to come out immediately and to deal with those meters that were perceived to be inaccurate, making inaccurate measures. They came out immediately. They replaced the meters. They took corrective action. But with any new technology, you may have some initial glitches. Our second point is that the life of the meters are computers. They have two-way communication. And technologies will evolve, just like your cell phone has evolved. I remember taking my kids to soccer games. I used to have this big battery pack with my cell phone. Now I have a little cell phone that I can put in my wallet almost. So technologies will evolve. With the meter, that will evolve as well. You don't have to replace the entire meter. You replace an element of the meter. The meters have open architect, and that's what the National Institute of Science and Technology, who are developing the standards for the meters and so forth, that's what they're working on. They're ensuring that these meters, in fact, are meters that are widely accepted, that are accurate meters, that deal with a number of other concerns that consumers and that industry would have as well. So the meters will have a very long lifetime because the elements can be changed out. With respect to the responsiveness and I think the fundamental issue that we're talking about on this panel is we need to do a better job explaining the benefits of a smart meter. All utilities need to have a very robust consumer education program. And my colleague here was right when I was explaining the benefits of the smart meter and the smart grid. I was making an assumption, which was a bad assumption on my part, that everybody knew what I was talking about. So we have to dumb up the dialogue, and we have to be a little bit more interactive. So there are a lot of lessons that we can learn from the rollouts that we've done up to now. But I really believe that PG&E has been responsive. I believe the technology is an evolving technology. The meters that they're installing are meters that have high quality. They were very responsive in taking out the meters and responding to the customer complaints. But again, I'll go back to what I said originally, that we do need to concentrate on having a better communication with the customer and understanding and having the customer understand the benefits that we see from installing the meters and the broader benefits that will accrue from the smart grid.
Thank you. Okay, let's talk a little bit about these higher bills. Is that because consumers had unrealistic expectations, or is there something else going on? Is that something?
Okay, I'll respond to that. And I'll respond to it in the context of the question was asked earlier. There are two different things that are occurring simultaneously. We are replacing the meters, in some instances we're replacing meters at a time where utilities are having their highest electricity demand. And so some customers may assume that the meter is providing higher readings of their energy usage without acknowledging, however, that this is a period of hot weather and a period where their traditional usage is much higher than what it normally would be. And one of the things that needs to happen is that we need to explain to the customer, if I'm putting in a smart meter, I'm putting in a smart meter at a time during the summer period where your demand will be very high. And if you can look at your historical bill, you'll notice that during times of high demand, your energy prices will be your energy bill may be much higher. So the meter is not contributing to a higher bill. The weather's contributing to the higher bill, and higher energy usage is contributing to the bill. We need to be able to explain to the customer the differences. Explain to the customer that their normal bill would have been X. Their bill is still X, but the meter is now making it more precise, so they're able to, in fact, know with greater degree of accuracy how they can save energy and how they can reduce their overall energy consumption through some form of dynamic pricing, working with the electric utility company.
Okay. John, I want you to respond to that specifically, and then we're going to kind of broaden the conversation a little bit and start talking a little bit about, do they understand how to respond to time of use pricing, and what happens when you put in smart meters but you keep the old dumb rates with Bob. So please respond, if you can, directly to this issue.
Very briefly, in California, there were complaints about wildly higher bills from.
Can you give us an example of how high?
I don't have specific cases, but there were many complaints of wildly higher bills that customers complained were not the result of weather or overconsumption on their part, but which the people who were complaining attributed to the communication networks involved and to the function of the meter or the chip in the meter itself. So while I agree that it would, we could all benefit in all service territories from better education about energy usage during different times of the day and means of reducing consumption. There certainly were specific complaints in California that have not been adequately addressed to this date, and maybe they will be in the future, but that had really little or nothing to do with consumption or weather.
Okay. Do you want to talk about the rate issue?
Well, I think the part of the problem in this conversation, and in this conversation over the past 5 years, has been that the rates, the prices have been disconnected from the technology. That somehow this technology in and of itself will do much of anything. I mean, it will allow for remote disconnection. But the value proposition for customers has been remarkably unclear. And I would argue that the real value proposition for customers is not the high prices, hardly a value proposition. The real value proposition for customers is the 95% of the hours when the prices in the electricity market are far lower than they're being charged.
I agree.
And until regulators and companies start talking about the actual value proposition, I don't see why anybody would do this. If they simply say to me, well, I'm going to put this cool new meter and then I'm going to expose you to high prices, that's not really a value proposition. The dilemma, and with all due respect, the dilemma is that generators in restructured markets and utilities in vertically integrated markets tend to make their money in the off-peak hours. That's when because they can generate cheap and sell at this average bundled rate. And so when I speak about a new business model, we're really talking about a sort of existential restructuring of the relationship between customers, wires, and generators. And I don't think we've come to terms with that. Let me make one other quick point. If I were looking to sell a cool high-tech gizmo to customers, to be perfectly honest, the last group I would ask to do that would be electric utilities. I mean that without disrespect. That's just it's not a skill set that you guys have tended to have.
Well, I disagree with you, but I'll get
okay. I would go to Apple or Johnson & Johnson or somebody who knows something about customers.
And know about reliability.
Right.
Understood.
Affordable and
That's
reliability
perfectly fair.
has been
Okay.
the utility mantra for the past 100 years or
Affordability
so.
and reliability, I would argue the electric utilities are good at.
And that's what most customers are most concerned about. Keeping
Agreed.
the lights on, having quality of service, having continuity of service.
Absolutely. Let's continue. Can we continue the existential thought here, and then we're going to go to talk a little bit about consumers' response to time of use pricing.
The existential thought, I think, is essentially that if regulators and if customers and if utilities are going to capture the value and allocate it fairly, there has to be a serious rethink about both how pricing works and how customers are engaged. And neither of those have I seen happen to this point.
I think to follow up on that, one of the interesting things that happens when people talk about energy and economics is people assume, oh, high prices will reduce people's use, or high prices create an incentive, which then gas goes up to $4 a gallon, and people are saying, but I have to get to work, I can't reduce my use. And you have this sort of tension between the theory of economics and the reality of energy inelasticity. And what it brings up, I think, with the smart grid is we have incentives for the customers to reduce energy by raising prices, but I wonder if we have incentives in place to encourage the utilities to communicate the need for consumers to change their behavior dramatically in order to profit from this. And we have time for questions afterwards. So let's talk a little bit about time of use pricing and incentivizing, and then.
Great. I've been biting my tongue over here. I think there are a couple of issues with regard to the value to consumers. I think one of the big things that we often forget is that our energy systems have changed so much over the last 200 years, right? I mean, think about how we used to heat our homes. We started out probably chopping wood, right? Putting wood in our furnaces, burning wood in our fireplaces. You know how much energy you're using when you're out there chopping the wood, right? That we switched to coal in a lot of cases. And you'd have to get up in the morning and shovel the coal into your furnace, and you had a sense for how much coal you were using. And anymore, the electricity, natural gas that we're using to fuel our homes is just invisible to us because it just comes seamlessly into our homes, and we don't see it. And I think that it's unrealistic to expect households to be good energy managers when they can't even see the energy they're consuming. There's a good analogy which is that's been used probably for almost 40 years now. It'd be like if you went to the grocery store and you just filled up your cart and then they gave you a bill at the end. It's like, well, yeah, I have no idea how you arrived at that number, but I have to eat, So I think that one of the real key issues here is that the great thing about feedback and smart meters is that it can make energy use visible again to the consumers. And in fact, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that consumers, already understand that reducing energy consumption is a good and important thing. They already understand that energy efficiency is something that they should be striving for. There was a Gallup poll a few years back that asked consumers a long list of things that they should be doing. And in fact, they recognize, 78% of people said they should be spending several $1,000s to increase the energy efficiency of their homes. I mean, people recognize that this is important. In terms of the peak, off-peak, what I'm getting at here is that people are motivated. They need not only the energy information, but other sources of motivation. And so from this, and they will save energy. And the 57 studies that we looked at in our meta review show, in fact, that if you provide people with the energy information that they need and primarily non-economic means of motivating them to action and giving them the tools and information so that they know what exactly, energy efficiency is a great idea, but what does that mean in my household? If you give them the tools so that they know exactly how to take action, what to do, that people will do that. And one of the interesting things that Lisa was referring to in our study is that when we compared the programs that focused on shifting use from peak to non-peak using economic incentives, the overall energy savings was much lower. And in fact, those programs, tend to be much less effective than programs that are actually focused on overall energy conservation and efficiency. So the 4 to 12% energy savings that I mentioned are not from programs that are focused on shifting from peak to off-peak. Those are the programs primarily, those are the average savings primarily that are coming from programs that are really aimed at giving people the information they need so they can become better energy managers 24/7.
And the part that I loved about the study actually is that it suggests that a very effective strategy is to make people feel a little bit bad because their neighbors are doing better. So it might be that we're less responsive to price signals and more responsive to the Joneses as an incentive.
Well, exactly. I mean, if you find out you're using 800 kilowatt hours a month, and that's great. It's great information. But people tend to be much more responsive if they find out that their neighbors are using. They have the same house. They're using 600 kilowatt hours a month. So there's a whole variety of ways of actually motivating people to take action. You don't necessarily have to, create a rate structure to do that.
Okay, thank you. And this kind of brings up the question of whether the most effective thing is the smart meter giving feedback to the individual person, or if it's some sort of sign that lights up on the front of their house that says this is a Prius-style house, or this is like a 1955 Ford Fairlane-style house. I mean, it may be, we found in California that there's a strong sort of competitive aspect to energy use that we're just starting to delve into. We're going to switch to the Maryland PUC decision, what John described as a game changer. And one of the things that decision brings up that's very interesting, as you mentioned, first of all, you have a state PUC saying no to $136 million in federal funds, which is kind of amazing. But I think the reasoning and the very careful wording of their reasoning, because they really, some interpreted this as a blow to the smart grid, but in fact it was very carefully nuanced to not really be about the smart grid, but about who bears the risks of financing the smart grid. And so I'm going to read you, I guess if you're an energy policy wonk, this sounds like poetry, but anyway. The proposal asks BG&E's ratepayers to take significant financial and technological risks and adapt to categorical changes in rate design, all in exchange for savings that are largely indirect, highly contingent, and a long way off. We are not persuaded that this bargain is cost-effective or serves the public interest, at least not in its current form. This proposed project is, in our view, classic utility infrastructure investment that should be recovered through distribution rates, not in a supplemental surcharge that begins long before customers could realize any benefits from the project. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was how much risk and cost should consumers bear as this goes out. Now, one thing I do want to say is that yesterday, I think, BG&E, the Baltimore Gas and Electric, actually refiled its proposal. The DOE had given the utility until July 30th to scramble together a new proposal that approaches the issue in a different way, and we don't know whether the reaction of the Maryland PUCs to that, but it was refiled yesterday. So, we're going to discuss a previous case since we don't know what the next thing is. So let's talk a little bit about how much risk and cost consumers should bear. Who would like to go first? David?
Yeah, let me, if I might. Yeah,
the risk in this case was the cost. So what was happening was, to give you some... Okay, so the cost estimated by the Baltimore Gas and Electric Company was that the installation of 1.36 million electric smart meters was going to cost $135 million, 435 during initial deployment, 353 million over the expected lifetime of 15 years, and 136 million from the Recovery Act. And it estimated that consumers would save 2.6 billion over 15 years. But to explain the thinking of some of the Maryland PUC's statement about consumers bearing all the risk, basically consumers were going to pay for those meters up front, and the utility was, in the beginning, going to make back some money because it wouldn't need to hire meter readers. It would save money right off the bat. And then the savings themselves were really dependent upon consumer behavior, whether or not they ever got those $2.6 billion in savings. And another component, before we go off onto this, was, and I'll quote again from the decision, or the reasoning, the proposal would not in and of itself enhance the electricity transmission grid or the company's distribution backbone, their quotes. Rather, in order to realize the reliability and efficiency benefits of a smart and self-healing distribution system, the company presumably would need to incur significant additional expense. So in other words, this really only dealt with consumers, and it didn't deal with all the other aspects of the smart grid that were going to have to be installed to realize the other operational savings. Okay.
If I might just first clarify a couple of points. First, I don't think that the Maryland decision was a slam dunk against smart meters or smart grid. In fact, I think it was just the opposite. The Commission said your filing needs to have some elements that we want to have modified. And they discussed 4 specific issues. They discussed the whole issue of cost recovery, where the company had felt that it was prudent to surcharge customers to pay up front for the installation of the meters. This is a tremendous capital investment that's got to be made by Baltimore Gas and Electric. And it's a tremendous... Yes, the costs were I don't know per person.
I'm sorry, well, we don't have those figures.
I don't have that data, but I can say that the aggregate
we will
costs...
have time.
35 million up front.
Well, that's not true.
Divided by
The
what
government, there's several. If we could just break it down into components. The cost for the installing the meters, including the carrying costs, if you carry it over a long period of time, is over $800 million. That's for a 15-year period. The benefits are $2.6 billion. So if you're talking about risk-reward, subtract the $800 million from $2.6 billion, and you see that's the benefit to the customer.
Over 15 years,
Over a
potentially.
15-year period. And this is normal rate making. It happens every day when a utility makes an investment in a facility. They can't pay for the facility in cash, so you put the facility, you find a way to have customers who are going to benefit from those investments to help pay for that over time, but the customer gets a benefit. The annualized benefits would be about $100 a year once the meters are installed that the customer would get. That's at least what the company's filing has indicated. The second point is that the Commission said cost recovery is an issue that we have a difficulty with. So we prefer a different approach than the company is using. Rather than surcharging customer rates up front, we suggest an approach where you put them in rates, and over the life of the project, you charge customers so much monthly and so much annually to recover the cost for the meters.
In a sense, they said this isn't a smart grid issue. This is just standard electrical
This
equipment.
is rate making. So
Yeah.
this isn't a smart grid issue. This is just normal rate making. There are a range of approaches that commissions use to deal with the issue of cost recovery. And the company put their issues before the Commission. They refiled. The second issue, which was very important, is that the Commission said, we understand what you're trying to do with respect to charging different prices throughout the day. That's called time of use pricing to customers. But low-income and elderly customers, we believe, the Commission said, should not be subject to a time of use rate, that they should have the ability to opt out, to decide whether they want to have that kind of a rate or not. That's also normal rate making. BG&E has a pilot experiment, with all due respect, that in my judgment concluded that low-income customers do benefit from pricing differentials. The third thing that the Commission said is you need a more robust customer education program. The company had a program that would have cost $50 million to educate customers about the smart meter, about ways that they can save energy and so forth, and the Commission said it needs to be more robust. And the third thing that the Commission talked about was this issue of balancing risk and rewards, risk mitigation. And is the company employing the right technology? Are they approving the right strategy to go forward? And I will say I look at all the smart meter programs throughout the United States. I don't see anything that is abnormal. The BG filing that I see from others. 9 other commissions adopt the approach that BG&E was proposing before the Maryland Commission. So this was not a slam dunk against smart grid. This was a discussion about rate making, how you mitigate risk, how you recover costs, how you show the customer the benefits, how you get the customer involved in the program, and how you give the customer some flexibility. That's how I read the order.
Okay. Who wants to respond?
Yeah, I just have a brief comment. I mean, one of the other things that that they were critical of with BG&E's proposal was that it didn't involve in-home displays. So again, you know, you can inform consumers about the benefits of this, but in terms of their ability to manage their energy consumption, it wasn't there. It wasn't part of the proposal, and that was a big, significant criticism of the proposal as well.
And I think that also one of the aspects of this is that, can you explain the orb?
Can I explain the orb?
We need to talk about the orb for a second, because what happened with BG&E had done 2 pilot studies in 2008 and 2009, and they used extra equipment to signal people about pricing. And from what I understand, this particular proposal that they were presenting to the PUC did not actually involve the signals that they were using. And so if you could explain the orb.
Yeah, sure. So the energy orb is actually, it's a feedback device, but it's one of the most rudimentary feedback devices as far as I'm concerned. So that was the one they were using, and they weren't involving it. Yeah, so the orb is basically a little desktop light fixture that glows different colors depending on what the rate currently is, what the electricity rate is. So like if it's glowing red, you know that you should probably be cutting back on your electricity consumption. So that's,
and if it's glowing green, you know you can use more, I guess.
Right. Well, yeah, that's one way. Maybe that's why they sort of don't save any energy over on a monthly basis. It encourages people to shift their use from one period of time to another, as opposed to providing any real information about energy consumption numbers, right? How much I'm consuming at a particular time of day, and actually engaging people and empowering people to actually do something with real information to manage their own energy consumption.
And just to go into that a little bit more, they had actually some interesting statistics that seem to show that actually giving people just flat out money for reducing their use during peak times actually seem to be more effective than some of the other feedback in the time of use pricing. So just like sending them a little check of a thank you, as far as I can understand, was more effective. Do you want to respond more specifically?
Sure. A couple of things. First of all, many consumers and consumer groups are not anti-technology or anti any specific type of meter per se. However, I think most consumer groups would agree and advocate for a careful review of all costs and benefits and the assumptions associated with touted costs and benefits of a project prior to deployment and implementation. And in the BG&E decision, I think the Commission did a good job in really in requiring a careful look at the costs and benefits. And when they discussed risk, I think one of the issues that they raised is that the touted benefits and the projected costs were not numbers that were set in stone, but were instead subject to dispute, and therein lies part of the risk to consumers. For example, much of the benefits associated with deployment of these meters was based on the assumption that there would be mitigated energy and capacity cost savings going forward. The consumers would reduce consumption or shift on-peak consumption to cheaper periods of time that would, it was assumed in the proposal, allow the company to lower the cost to purchase that energy and capacity in the wholesale marketplace. Well, I think the Commission really questioned those assumptions about the extent to which customers would in fact respond, particularly in light of the fact that there were no in-home display devices, no appliances in the household, really no change that would facilitate customer changes in behavior. So those assumptions were questioned. The costs as well, I believe it was mentioned that the $835 or so million associated with purchase of the meters and the associated communication infrastructure was really perhaps only the tip of the iceberg. If there were to be in-home readout devices, for example, those could be had for significant additional costs. Certainly there were no transmission and distribution upgrades associated with the proposal. When people talk about smart grid, often the T&D system and the ability of the system to integrate renewables and facilitate load growth and greater levels of savings, none of those sorts of investments were included. And there were a host of other costs and benefits. There were, however, the Commission noted some operational savings that would accrue. I wish that this order would have been a little more explicit in defining what those operational savings, those touted operational savings were. The order alluded to savings in meter reading, for example, and they noted that there would be savings in the costs associated with field personnel. Well, some of those savings that were folded into the cost-benefit analysis again speak to the consumer protection issue. You don't have the cost of field personnel if you're going to remotely disconnect a customer for non-payment. So some of the benefits that were associated with this were not delineated clearly in this order, and I wish they had been. But the Commission did ask for a full accounting of costs and benefits. To speak to this mandatory time of use issue raised in the order and discussed here before, consumers tend to prefer a more incentive-based approach, I think it's safe to say. And Tyson's here. If I say anything the public citizen doesn't like, I know you'll let me have it. But basically, there are approaches to changing consumer behavior that don't require mandatory time of use rates where some customers win and some customers lose. For example, I think in the energy efficiency community there is broad consensus that direct load control really does go a long way toward achieving some of the policy objectives.
What's direct load control?
Direct load control provides the utility company with the ability to power down certain appliances in a consumer's residence or business. For example, if you have a central air conditioning unit with direct load control, a utility company during a peak period or particularly a critical peak period can power down that device either completely or by a small percentage. And for the right to do so, incentives can be paid to that consumer. And the incentives, the economics of this work, the incentives are less than the utility saves in the wholesale power market in order to accomplish that peak load reduction. So there are many ways to provide incentives and a system of carrots to customers rather than the penalties associated with many time-of-use structures that I won't open this can of worms right now completely.
We're gonna talk about best practices in a moment.
All right, I'll hold that off.
Okay.
Until then.
So, Bob, one of the things that as a regulator, I mean, how do you think this risk should be apportioned? The risk. There's a couple of things. There's the risk of the investment and whether it gets whether it's useful, and then the second thing is being exposed to this whole wide world of market risk as we all have to start day trading power when we've been basically going to an all-you-can-eat buffet for the past 5 generations.
This is a big problem, the all-you-can-eat buffet. I was noting in today's Wall Street Journal that, I don't know if anybody read it, but there's a long article about electricity in Afghanistan. And it turns out that the Taliban are offering, they don't use meters, and they offer a fixed rate for all you can consume, whereas the Afghan government uses meters and tries to charge time of use, and you can guess who's more popular.
This is starting to blur into other New America events with Steve
Sorry,
Paul
I apologize.
and Peter Bergen. Sorry.
I apologize. I was shocked to see a discussion of meters and the Taliban in the paper today. I would agree with Mr. Owen. I mean, this is a straight regulatory problem. This whole question of where does the risk go, you deal with this every case. I mean, it really, the utility says, if I put the money up and then you guys decide 5 years from now to disallow it, I'm screwed. What am I going to do? And so I'm not going to do anything unless you sort of say, I can collect, that it was prudent to make this decision. The consumer groups say, what if they hire their cousin? And he has a low IQ and can't do the job. We want to be able to say, that should be disallowed because it wasn't right. So you're constantly trying to balance the utility need to raise capital and to be assured that money will flow with the point of regulation, which is to make sure that it's spent wisely and you get the right outcome. So that doesn't particularly surprise me. And I think that the commission made a reasonable decision, and my presumption is they will come in and some of the risk will get shifted a little bit and they'll accept it. But I think there's 2 points here that I think is absolutely important to understand. We're talking about an unknown future. So when you're dealing with an unknown future, you have to assume away the uncertainty in a regulatory sense in order to make a decision. So, so if, in the old days, you would say, well, should I build a coal plant or should I build a nuclear plant? And they would go, well, in 30 years, this will be the price of coal, and in 30 years, this will be here's how much the nuclear plant will cost, and I roll it all back, and I say this one's cheaper. And we pretend there's no uncertainty, and therefore we choose this one. And so in a sense, you're facing the same dilemma here. You're facing the dilemma of saying, if I invest the $800 million, do I get these reductions and therefore avoid high capacity costs? Do I avoid all this electrical stuff? And, in the end, the commission, my guess is, will accept some of that. But you're dealing with an uncertainty. You're dealing with the future. And so you have to make these decisions. And the problem with the demand side stuff, whether it's efficiency or meters, is that it's easier to say, I don't think it'll happen, because it has to do with customers. With power plants, we run the power plants, we know. And so the standard, I think, is really, in a sense, unfair to the demand side resources or demand side, because it's much easier to say, well, customers won't do that. and therefore you go, well, if customers won't do it, we're not going to authorize it. And I think this is a real problem. I think that the future is going to be far more expensive than the past unless we do stuff, and yet we don't want to do the things that we have to do to try and avoid that. Could I just add one other point? Yeah. You said something which irked me. So
Good.
I have to say. So, I mean, the question is, some customers win and some customers lose in time-of-day rates. I would argue that under current rates, some customers win and some customers lose. I would argue that under current rates, I think under current rates, if you use a fan and don't have an air conditioner, you're paying rates which assume you have an air conditioner. A small 800 square foot apartment with a fan is being charged rates that are subsidizing 4,000 square foot houses with with industrial scale air conditioning. And one of the things that smart meters do is it allows you to actually pay pay the costs that you impose on the system. And the question is, can we ever get to a point where we're comfortable doing that? I would argue that low-income customers would benefit from an unbundling of the rates rather than be hurt by it.
So do we have responses to that?
I guess I agree. In fact, we did a study, 5 different utilities that had pilot programs, and particularly we focused on the impact of dynamic pricing on low-income customers. And all the studies, we looked at the BG&E pilot, we looked at 2 pilots in California, we looked at pilot in Connecticut Light and Power of Northeast Utilities, we looked at Pepco's pilot, and it was concluded that even if you don't have a shift in electricity demand by the customer, I mean, we recognize that low-income customers, you really don't have the substantial peaks that you do with normal customers, with other customers, people that have higher income levels. So there's not a shift in peak, but the base rate that you have, that you provide for critical peak load pricing, dynamic pricing, that rate is lower. The off-peak rate is lower than what your normal flat rate. So your average customer is going to see some savings. And all the pilots that we looked at are very, very compelling, that there should be some sensitivity that low-income customers, in fact, will respond to price signals, to dynamic pricing, to critical peak load pricing, to time-of-use pricing, and that what you have to do is you have to offer them those programs. You don't have to mandate them, but you should offer them those programs. And I think the results are fairly compelling. I have a couple of copies of it for those in the audience that would like to review it.
And are you talking about opt-in programs? So they have the option of opting
They have
into,
the option.
so it's not a mandatory.
If you're in a pilot, you're agreeing that you're going to be in that pilot. All of these were pilots.
Okay, let's talk about the low. Do you want to respond
yes,
on the low income?
we
Okay,
do.
okay. You respond and then you respond and then.
I have to say that there's actually a lot of evidence to suggest that if used in, well, first of all, that high income and users typically use more electricity, and high electricity users tend to save the most from feedback kinds of programs. So this is not just time of use rates, but I'm talking about feedback more broadly. On the other hand, there are some prepaid metering schemes that have been very successful and very well received by low-income customers and have had actually pretty dramatic energy savings associated with them that don't involve time-of-use rates. So there are other ways of doing that are actually more effective.
Oh boy, where do I begin?
Begin quickly.
Well, there are a few things here. First of all, I just this is an interesting study that David alluded to, and I began reading it this morning, so I'd like to pay a little bit more attention to it. My initial sense is that the pilot programs that were reviewed and where the conclusions were drawn that low-income customers will benefit through dynamic pricing and time-of-use rates were very small, short-lived pilot programs. I have questions about statistical significance, sample size, sampling in general, self-selection.
I'd be delighted to work to answer your questions.
And I'm interested to learn more about the data associated with this study. There's also reference to some of the conclusions in this study were drawn based on what the authors refer to as price elasticity parameters rather than actual percentage load reductions that were measured among segmented income groups. And that raises some concerns for me, and again, I would like to spend some more time with this study. In terms of winners and losers, I think it goes without saying that some customers have better wherewithal to shift load than others. We know from the Residential Energy Consumption Survey, for example, that and you can correlate these findings by income groupings, but different customers are more likely, different groups of customers are more likely to own older, less efficient appliances and live in less efficient dwelling units. Again, income is correlated with those findings, as is renter status versus home ownership status. Now, if you own your basic electricity consumption is an old clunker refrigerator, maybe an old clunker room AC, and some light bulbs, is your ability to save at peak, and you stay at home all day, perhaps because you're elderly, is your ability to save at peak the same as a customer with much more efficient appliances, more appliances, so their baseline starts at a different level, and perhaps those in more energy efficient dwelling units. So these are questions that arise in terms of winners and losers. Would also add that Nancy Brockway, a colleague of mine, has also done studies on winners and losers. She has done a very good job in differentiating between high and low volume consumers as well as low income and non-low income consumers, and I would urge folks to take a look at her work as well. Okay. I have a couple more points, but again, we'll wait until...
So we're going to have a question period, but what I want to switch right now to kind of best practices very quickly. We've raised, I think, a lot of the issues that are starting to come up around the smart grid, and some of the issues that will be of regulatory concern, of ways for utilities to communicate, also some of the incentive structures and how many things I think were assumed as the rollout began are now, many of these assumptions are starting to look like the classic, the classic saying about assumptions, which is that things turn out to be not what you expected exactly. What I'd like to get each person to talk about is what are some of the success stories, what are some of the best practices that we can already identify. Karen, do you want to start with that?
Sure. Certainly in some of the 57 studies that we looked at, certain ones certainly were more effective and more successful than others. Generally, if you're going to go the smart meter route, as I said, smart meters really aren't either necessary nor sufficient, but if you're going to go that route, then definitely providing some type of in-home display or online kind of display that really gives people more information about their energy consumption than simply just what the current price rate is very useful and has had huge impacts in helping people manage their energy consumption better. And when combined with programs that have a variety of non-economic incentive structures associated with them, as well as very tailored and targeted information about what people can do in their specific household to reduce their energy consumption, you see dramatic increases in the amount of energy conservation and investments in efficiency. And so the combination of those things, when you see overall energy use reduced, you're talking about reducing, from a consumer's perspective, their energy bill across the board, right? Not just a matter of shifting use times. And from a consumer's perspective, you're empowering people to be part of the solution, which I think is absolutely critical. In this country, if we continue to rely solely on the big players, right, the utilities, the government, and or other players like Google, we continue to disengage people. People are ready to do their part, but they don't know what to do. And I think if we're going to, if we're going to do these smart meters, and I think there are a lot of benefits to doing them, we need to make sure that they're benefiting consumers as well, and we need to be doing it in a smart way that empowers consumers to actually do what they can and what they want to do.
So, thank you. I think that's really important. The whole empowerment angle is very important. John, can you tell me of a really great utility rollout of smart meters from your perspective?
No.
All right. The bar has been set.
Is that all?
Do you have a second best?
Well, I'd rather not talk about a positive rollout of smart meters, but I think before we go ahead with it, first a thorough analysis has to take place of all costs and benefits. There should be no mandatory time of use rates foisted on consumers. I think many time of use rates are based on just passing through wholesale prices to customers, and I don't think many of us in here would suggest that the wholesale electricity market is in great shape right now and is a good competitive place for customers to be. There needs to be a planning process associated with these rollouts. I think sometimes we put the cart before the horse in looking at rollout of meters. Isn't it better to first set up a planning process whereby we identify those policy objectives that we're trying to achieve, and then look at the best means of achieving those policy objectives as they're associated with energy consumption, peak reduction, deployment of renewables, etc. And smart meters should be compared with other alternative means of achieving those objectives prior to investing hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, in systems that haven't been contrasted with other alternatives such as direct load control. Finally, we believe that remote disconnection, while remote disconnection in and of itself may present some efficiencies, it should not be allowed prior to conducting a premise visit. This gets to basic health and safety. The rates of disconnection will increase with this technology rolled out, and if we don't ensure and keep a safety net in place, not to be maudlin about this or melodramatic, but there will be deaths, such as there were in Fairfax, California, about a month ago. No proposal we feel should be approved similarly that doesn't account for or it should be made prior to the acceptance of some interoperability standards, some privacy standards, and some communication standards so that technologies don't become obsolete before they've begun to be paid for.
Oh, and we can talk more in the question period about this. This has implications for both federal and state policies. Bob, I'd like you to talk a little bit from either wearing your regulatory hat or your Center for Neighborhood Technology hat in thinking about what's kind of the ideal program from consumers' point of view.
I was all prepared with an answer to the other question.
Do you want to answer?
No, I agree. No, there are no good examples. No, so let me say three things. I I think the first thing is that all of these new tools, the feedback tools, the pricing tools, this is going to require learning. It's going to require people learning how to use them. One of my big concerns is that all of the sort of evaluations that are going on, a lot of them are one-year evaluations. And one-year evaluation isn't going to tell you anything. You got to have patience. People take time to learn. So the first question is it's very hard to draw conclusions on a 1 year or even 2 year basis. We've been running in Chicago, this is my CNT hat on, we've been running a residential real-time pricing project for 6 years now. There's 25,000 households. We've all saved a lot of money. I won't go into all the details. The point is it's taken 2 or 3 years before people have figured out how to do it, and now they don't want to leave it. They like it a lot, but it's taken 3, 4, 5 years as people have learned how to incorporate this. I think of this whole smart grid, smart meter, customer engagement thing kind of the way I got out of graduate school in 1980. I went to work. I was a good employee. My boss came to me in 1981 and said, "Do you want a computer on your desk?" And I uttered the famous line, "What would I do with the computer on my desk?" And I think we're sort of at that stage here. We're all sort of struggling. How is this going to play out? We don't really know. And so in a sense, we have to depend on the ability of people to learn, adapt, and begin to make these things work for them. And it's going to take some time and patience. And neither the utilities nor regulators have a lot of time and patience. So I think that's a real problem. I just want to note I think feedback is incredibly important. I think we do a really bad job of it. I want to put in I don't know if you guys have seen the O-Power stuff, but I highly recommend looking at the O-Power stuff.
O-Power.
O-Power. Yeah, look it up on the web. They do just really neat feedback for customers and communities. But I do think that we need to take seriously feedback and pricing. I think feedback and pricing together is far more powerful than either of them by themselves. And I think that's critically important. Politically, I don't think there's any likelihood that there's any regulatory body in the United States that's going to order mandatory real-time or
time of use price
or whatever. I don't think that's going to happen. I think if we're lucky, what we'll get is a set of choices, and if those choices are well explained and well understood over time, I think you'll get people adopting them.
David, can you tell us of a utility whose communication with consumers has been, in your opinion, exemplary?
I can tell you of utilities that have evolving programs. And let me try to respond more directly to your question. We are rolling out smart meters, as was indicated even in your remarks. We anticipate 60 million smart meters by 2019. So I learned a lot from this panel. It would seem to me that there would be 4 areas that I think that we should all seek to strive to. One of those would be a clear cost recovery mechanism, so the customers know that they're getting a benefit and they need to understand what the costs are. And there are 2 elements there. What you want to do is you want to make sure that the customer doesn't see a rate shock, doesn't see a substantial increase in their rates when you put in a newer technology. And at the same time, you want to give some investment certainty to the utility who is seeking to make an investment to provide the customer benefits. Second thing I think, and we've talked a lot about that, is you want a robust customer education program. You want a program where the customer knows the benefits they're getting. They first understand what a smart grid is. You could go over this panel and ask each of us a definition of a smart meter and smart grid. We'd probably all give you different answers. So you have to get the customer engaged. I see a lot of programs that my member companies have. They're all great programs, but the program has got to be a robust education program that's ongoing in terms of refinement. I think you've got to provide for dynamic pricing. I agree with all the panelists. There are a broad range of ways that we can have the customer save energy. You can insulate your home. You can do a number of things. But there are also some areas where prices will have behavior changes. So we have to provide for dynamic pricing. Provide that customers, when they use energy during high peak periods, that they do have a signal where they can make a decision whether they want to get a lower rate by being a part of a dynamic pricing program that the utility has in place. And then finally, I would say this is all about balancing risks and rewards. This is a new technology that we're installing that's going to enable a lot of other broader technologies, such as plug-in electric vehicles, such as distributed resources, which includes rooftop solar, a whole new range of technologies, whole new range of partnerships and alliances. And so this is going to be ongoing, evaluating how we look at risks and rewards, how we mitigate the impact on the customer, and at the same time provide some clarity for investment. I think that those are the 4 parameters that I would look at if I were looking at any smart grid program. There's no perfect program today because we're evolving the smart meters today. I think 10 years from now we'll learn some lessons and say, you know, here's a program that I think is representative of a program that has all the best practices. But right now it's too early to say this is a better practice and that's a better practice. But these are the 4 parameters that I would look at if I were evaluating a smart grid program.
All right, thank you. We're going to move to questions now. We'll take the in the back. We'll move from, yes, that guy, and then move forward.
Hi, my name is, sorry, a little loud there. Ricky Gratz from the Maryland Office of People's Counsel. We're the consumer advocate in the state of Maryland. I just want to address first a couple of the statements that were made today regarding cost-benefit analysis. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to quote the Commission's order because I do think...
Is this in the form of a question?
Yes, there will be a question. But I think it's important to set the record straight here. If you'll bear with me 1 second.
I must say this was a totally blind choice. I had no concept.
It's hard to see.
I know it's unknown whether all the other people with their hands up are actually also from the Maryland Office of People's Counsel.
Just me.
Only hope.
Just me today. I was the lead attorney in this case, and I think it's important that we talk about some of these key issues. Number one, I think it would be beneficial just in general to get access to the Commission's order across everyone that's here today so that everyone could see it. It's in case number 9208, order number 83410. Addressing the cost effectiveness issue on page 4 of the Commission's order, I think it's important to quote the Commission here where it says, "We are mindful that during the pendency of its proposal, PG&E has received approval from DOE for $136 million in federal taxpayer funds that would partially offset the cost of the proposal to PG&E ratepayers. We are equally mindful, however, that a $136 million discount on an $835 million ratepayer investment cannot dictate the outcome here. Rather, in order to approve the proposal, we must determine that it is a cost-effective means of reducing consumption and peak demand of electricity by PG&E's customers." So in essence, the statute, which is what's most important here, is this proposal cost-effective? And I agree with the panelists who talked earlier today that essentially the Commission decided that this is not cost-effective. So I guess there are several other points that I'd love to address, including some of the statements by Mr. Owens about the IEE study about low income, what I would classify as rather weak conclusions out of that paper, and that paper actually didn't even look at BG&E's smart energy pricing pilot in 2009. It only looked in 2008. So there are a number of holes that we see within that study. We will be addressing that later on in the month or next month. But I guess the underlying question here is relating to cost effectiveness. The company's proposal was 80% based on supply side benefits, which the Commission acknowledges totally up in the air. So the question, I guess, for Mr. Owens and any other panelists is, based on the Commission's rejection of that cost-benefit analysis, even though there was a TRC proposed by the utilities of 3.2, how are you going to prove that the cost-benefit to consumers here without these supply-side benefits? Because the operational benefits are really only 20%. So how do you make the case that smart grid is really cost effective.
20 million to be precise.
Well, I would give a general answer rather than answer specifically for BG&E. They made an additional filing, as I understand it, yesterday, and since it's a pending matter before the commission, I think it's very inappropriate for me to discuss the details of their filing. I think they're better able to explain that than I am. But I certainly can respond more broadly and suggest to you, as you already know, that in wholesale markets, when you install a smart grid, you're putting what we call synchrophases throughout your transmission system, which enables you to understand more directly whether there are disturbances that may occur in the system, and it permits you to readjust your system flows, permits you to use your power facilities much more efficiently, because you're understanding in real time what your overall energy demands are and what the overall flows on the energy system are. All of those benefits from that, from using more efficient resources, from avoiding outages, all those benefits flow directly through to the customer through a fuel adjustment clause or through some other form of a wholesale power mechanism. BG&E has all those facilities. They would flow any immediate benefits from the PJM power pool, the Pennsylvania University Maryland interconnection, directly through to their customers. But the details of that, you would have to look at their filing and discuss that with the company. And then there's the other benefits that all the panelists have talked about, and those are the benefits that go behind the meter. Those are the benefits, aside from operating your system more efficiently, providing for a greater responsiveness to the potential for outages. There are also all the benefits that the customer would be able to derive from behind the meter, where the customer would be able to manage their own energy sources. Those were the benefits that were focused in the proceeding. The wholesale benefits from the marketplace, which accrue from being a part of a robust power system, such as the PJM power pool, and using synchrophasers and so forth, are operational benefits. And again, I think the company is better able to address those than I am.
We're going to take the next question up here in the front. And but just as we go to that, what I want to say is that one of the issues here is we really are changing the model in which utilities were initially, for the last 100 years or so, have been selling you power. And now they're going to be able to sell you not power. They're going to be able to sell the time that when you're not using power. And this is eventually the world that we're moving towards. And I think that that's one of the things that's referred to in the 80% of in that BG&E case is that the fundamental model is changing, and how are consumers going to be involved in that?
I'm Mitzi Wertheim. I'm with the Naval Postgraduate School, but from 06 until last December, I ran something in Washington called the Energy Conversation. And we had people from across government, industry, and the whole objective, we met monthly, was to educate people horizontally about all the really important issues. One thing that I was struck by was none of us had ever heard of FERC before we came to this. So I would argue that the general public doesn't you don't understand how uneducated we are. Yes. Secondly, you use a language that I can't understand, and I've been trying to pay attention to this for a long time. Yes. So I have no doubt you have been unable to communicate with the customers. I'm a social anthropologist by training, and I was asked to basically get a program going, which I did. I like to do that kind of stuff.
I'd like to move towards questions because we are running out of time.
I guess the question is, what do we need to do to help you figure out how to tell the story so we, the customers, understand what our choices are? I mean, I listened to this and I kept figuring out, I really would like to have a computer in my house telling me how much energy is being used. You couldn't tell me whether they exist, how much they cost, what would be the implications, and how it would affect my bill, and how would I know how to. I mean, I think there are a lot.
Read my report. It addresses all of those issues. It has the technology in there. It has the cost, some of the cost information. Of course, the technology is changing every day. So, yeah. But, and what the benefits have been for people who have participated in those kinds of programs with those types of technologies. So, Oh, God, you would ask me that. Do you have
I have
my
it right
title?
here. Advanced Metering Initiatives and Residential Feedback Programs, a meta-review for household electricity-saving opportunities. I really suggest that you Google her name.
Yeah, well,
The report and the BGE order is also on my blog.
They're all on
okay.
Jerry's blog.
And if you go
And
to
if
the
you come up to Jerry or
ACEEE
you come up to me
website.
afterwards, you can get the address of his blog.
Yeah.
Do people have, are there responses here, or shall we go to
Just
the next
very
question?
quick, you're right, absolutely right, and thank you for that. I think the White House also recognizes when they rolled out the smart meter, they have a series of dialogues that they've created recently so they can dumb this issue up, because we do use a lot of acronyms. All of us on this panel are energy experts, but we need to not talk like energy experts. We need to talk like consumers.
Okay.
Could I just say one thing?
Yeah.
One real quick thing. We ought to have a rule, and with all due respect to the engineers in the room, if we can sort of not have electrical engineers in charge of marketing this would be a really good, it would be a really good thing.
I mean, the people who market hamburgers, they seem to be able to get to us very well. Okay, one question up here, and then the guy in the back of the room, and the person in the middle, and you.
Hi, Tyson Slocum with the National Consumer Group Public Citizen. I think it's important to note that there isn't a single non-governmental consumer group in America that has endorsed the concept of smart meters as a benefit for consumers, with the primary reason that the vast majority of households under current smart meter programs are never going to save money in excess of what the smart meter is costing them. These smart meters can cost $400 to $500 over the lifetime of
Do you have a
these.
question?
And the question is,
I think that's
should smart meters be mandated for all customer classes, as currently is a policy under the stimulus funds and under some public utility commissions, or should a more thorough cost-benefit analysis be conducted to take into account there are radical differences between household capabilities, whether you are Bill Gates living in a 30,000 square foot McMansion, or you are a family of recent immigrants living many people to a small home, that should these policies be mandated across the board as they currently are, or should more discrete analysis be conducted to better serve different communities?
Okay, and if you want to break that question down into maybe there's some much cheaper way to accomplish the same thing, you can answer it that way. Who wants, Bob?
You know, in some sense, I agree with the general proposition that we don't know what the value proposition is. On the other hand, I'm going to flip the question, because it seems to me, I go back to the arithmetics of rate making. The 800 square foot house with a fan is subsidizing Bill Gates today. It's just the way rate making is done. And so in a sense, if you unbundled it, Bill Gates should pay more, and the 800 square foot low income or not low income, but 800 square foot with a fan should pay less. So, I mean, I think the essential premise is not, are we right today and the change would be detrimental? The question is, right now we have social policy where low usage customers are subsidizing high usage customers, and it just makes no sense.
Another response?
Low-income households use less energy than higher-income households. I think that's a known fact. They use more per square foot than higher-income households at the same time. And why is this? That's because of the old clunkers of refrigerators and thermal inefficiencies in their dwelling units for the most part.
And because they're renters.
And smart meters do nothing to address that.
They do
Okay.
nothing. That smart metering does nothing to address that. Cost-effective efficiency programs that are verifiable and that make a lot of sense, direct load control and other devices are available. And getting back to the informational aspect of smart metering, there are in-home readout devices that are available that have been mentioned. I think the cost of them is variable depending on their capabilities, but you don't need a smart meter and all the associated infrastructure to achieve those particular policy objectives. And yes, it's very clear, as Tyson suggests in his question, that the ability of different households and different classes of customers to shift and therefore avoid the penalties associated with peak pricing, that variability is also beyond dispute, and we need to be careful about structuring these rates or making them
Before we go on to this, I would just like to say that it is possible for the information on the smart meters to be neutral. I mean, it is completely possible. It is not particularly fair that Bill Gates has controls on every appliance in his house and can tell how much electricity they're drawing. And when I go back to my, I won't discuss the square footage of my rented dwelling, but I have to walk around the house and touch the appliance, touch the transformers to understand which are the least efficient, and so that I can feel which one is hot and which one is still burning. So I don't know that it's necessarily strictly the meter. It is the meter coupled with the rate structure that may create the unfairness.
Well, I don't know whether it creates unfairness. It's the meter coupled with the rate structure. And let me just correct a statement that was made earlier. The vision of the smart meter is that the smart meter will be able to, through a communication system, will be able to talk to the appliances. Your future appliances will in fact have an element that will provide for two-way communication. The customer will know what each appliance is using, and to the degree that the utility has dynamic pricing, they'll know the exact price hourly, what their prices are, and the customer remotely can say, I don't want that appliance running all day. Let me turn it off. So the customer will be able to manage their own bills. That's the vision about the smart meter. I think our conversation today is trying to take a snapshot and say, why aren't all those benefits here today? Well, they're not going to be here today. I understand that, and part of the reason for the stimulus package was to subsidize those customers, to give them ways that they could have put in insulation, put in new windows, because that stimulus package had $78 billion put aside for energy efficient related things. Only $4.5 billion for the smart meter. But the smart meter goes with all that other stuff. The energy efficiency, the customer taking out the old appliances, and those are now subsidized through the stimulus package, putting in newer appliances, putting in new windows, putting in better heating systems, putting in better roofs. All of those go to saving energy, using energy more efficiently. And then the appliances. We have a whole new set of appliance efficiency standards that have to be done. What disturbs me about our conversation today is we're trying to take one element of it and not really integrate it with the broad program that links the smart meter to all these other elements that are part of the smart grid.
And that's part of the time aspect.
Yes, we are.
First on the meters.
Yes.
I want to go to the guy in the back.
I understand. I didn't kill the conversation. I hope not.
Hi, my name is C.P. Shankar, and I'm with American Grid. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a business guy. I beg to differ with Mr. Owen over there.
Please.
You know, there's an old saying in America. You know, you can fool some of the people some of the time. You can fool some of the people all the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. Anyway you look at it, there is the thing smart meter is nothing but a cash register. All the benefits that Mr. Owens talked about can be done today on the web, where we can now look at appliance by appliance by appliance, what it's costing, not just in kilowatts, but in dollars and cents. It can be done today.
You can look at
you
your
have
meter.
And it can be done for $99 or less. Okay.
Is this
so?
this,
This is
is
not
this your product?
This is not what's that?
Is this the smart grid that you're talking about, or the grid, American Grid?
Well, besides there are a lot of other people besides American Grid. The point I'm making is what the utilities failed to see, what the utilities made a huge mistake, and all the regulators jumped on their bandwagon because utilities and the regulators are constantly together. Okay. Yes. And the reason they fell in the bandwagon is utilities wanted a new way to make more investments. They wanted a more powerful, meter to the meter replacement program to do remote, disconnects,
Could
and
you
to
switch
be
to a
able to
question?
do this. My question is this: why is it the utilities and the regulators constantly talk about dumbing down their discussions? Look, American consumers are not idiots. They're not stupid people. They're very, very smart people. Now, I'm sure there are some, cultural anthropologists who can say we're all dumb. I don't think so. What gets measured gets performed. Today, if we can, say, how many of you here today do not have a cell phone?
We
the question
really
is,
need your question.
Yeah, the question is, why do these people, utility people, want to dumb down these discussions? Make it more intelligent. Tell the truth.
Well, if
Okay.
I might respond, since you directed the question at me, I was responding to the concern that we have not educated the public, and I agree with that. And if we have this discussion on smart meters and smart grid, we're using a lot of jargon that the average consumer may not understand. Obviously, you understand it. So I'm suggesting we need a more robust outreach program and dialogue with our customers. If we believe our customers have benefited, they have to believe it as well.
I would just add to that that I think that, and by the way, I'm a sociologist, so I'm not an engineer or a lawyer or anything along those lines. But I think that you're right, and it's more than just informing and educating customers. I think it's engaging the public, and it's not. It shouldn't be a top-down approach. This should. I mean, if we're really going to reap all of the potential benefits, whether it's through smart meters or some other kind of grid, I think that utilities might be a player. I can imagine them being an important player. They don't have to be, but we really need to engage people and have the conversation from the bottom up.
I think one of the things that's really interesting is can any of us imagine having this conversation about our electric meter now? There's so much passion around this subject of the smart meters. It's very interesting, and I don't think it was anticipated by regulators or utilities, possibly foolishly. We have time for, I think, one more question. Jerry.
Getting back to, we start on the critical juncture. And just like, in the 30s when the Supreme Court moved on New Deal things, people said the Supreme Court looks at the election returns. We did see the PG&E case, and very recently we saw, very recently, in addition to BG, very recently we saw in Ohio, the Public Utility Commission basically say, we'll accept this application from First Energy, but we're actually not going to address the cost issues at all. And First Energy said, well, we can't go forward either if you do that. There seems to have been possibly a certain change among the PUCs. And are we now, because of the sort of the consumer blowback that is sort of growing up in the last 6 months, are we at a point where we are maybe at a critical juncture with the PUCs? Are the PUCs sort of reading the election returns right now? And what is that, and if so, what does that foretell not just for smart meters, but for smart grid overall?
You want to start?
Well, I think PUCs are starting to understand that this is not an issue that they can just plow ahead with without careful examination. And in the case of the First Energy decision, by denying cost recovery, clearly the PUCO knew what it was doing and what the ramifications would be. But I think regulators have come to understand that they've, like the rest of us, they're more educated about this issue, or some of us anyway, that have been looking at this issue. And perhaps more regulators are willing and feel compelled to examine very carefully the costs and benefits and the assumptions behind the benefits that will be realized and the interaction between the meters and the other components of smart grid and what those costs may be, or what can of worms they're opening up by accepting our money in advance. So You know, I don't know that they're just reading the election returns, but perhaps asking questions a little more critically than maybe the initial buzz of the Kool-Aid is worn off a little bit at this point, and they're asking real valid questions.
Could I just the average tenure of a regulator at the state is 3.7 years. They turn over quickly. The state regulators on electricity, on the energy issues, are not what I would call strategic thinkers. And I think part of part of what you're seeing is that this kind of investment, the sort of the application of sort of digital technology to the grid, is very complicated for state regulators. The value, to the extent that anybody believes there's any value, it's going to accrue when I'm gone. It's not going to accrue on my watch. And there's a lot of incentive for people to say, I don't understand it, I don't want to do it, let's go to the next one. And I think in some sense you have a governance issue. I mean, let me just real quickly. I mean, state regulators have operated under reliable and affordable. That's been their targets. And I think sort of underlying this whole dynamic is the question of what does it mean to be reliable, affordable, and clean? And I don't think we know yet. And I think part of this whole conversation is getting to the issue of, if we're going to be reliable, affordable, or clean, how are we going to do that? And how are we going to maintain reliability? How are we going to maintain affordability? And how are we going to back down the carbon? And those are issues which I think are at the heart of the smart grid debate, and we haven't addressed yet. And I don't think anybody's really addressed them.
And I totally agree with what he just said. I don't think this is political. I think this is the normal job of a regulator. Look at the cost effectiveness of any program. I think what makes our debate complicated today is we used to say when we put in an investment that we would see prices go down. We now say we put in an investment, prices won't go up as much. So we're no longer a declining cost industry. We're an increasing cost industry all across America, all technologies. So regulators have a very difficult job because they recognize that they're going to have to raise consumer rates. And what they've got to do is they've got to look at all the technologies that are before them. And they've got to make a decision to keep the lights on, to make the rates affordable, make sure that there's no interruption, and to make sure, too, that they're not technologically obsolescence. And it's a very, very, very tough job. So I don't think it's the politics. I just think it's the nature of rate making.
So, Karen, you kicked this off talking about how one of the issues with the smart grid or really using demand response is reaching critical mass fairly quickly so that people begin to see results over all of these investments and behavior changes in themselves. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit in response to this final question about kind of where you see opportunities for building critical mass that may...
That's a tough question. I mean, I think if it's done right, people are going to respond to this technology. The benefits to utilities at this point are very, very clear, I think. It's, as always, the difficulty in engaging the public, and I think one of the critical findings of our study is that it provides some support for the notion that when you provide people with the right tools and the right kinds of programs, not only do their behaviors change and they reduce their energy consumption, but that those changes in behavior and the reductions in energy consumption are somewhat persistent over time. And I think that, the more that utilities feel comfortable engaging the public and having them be part of the solution, the more that they're going to be interested in extending the benefits and really empowering consumers to take those actions. I think one of the things that have kept them from making those kinds of investments has been their concern over this issue of persistence. So in terms of reaching critical mass, I would say that it's not going to happen as quickly as we would like if we don't engage the public. And I think that, you know, there's lots of ways to do that. There are a lot of studies out there that can tell us what are more successful approaches than others. You know, maybe time of use rates are going to be part of part of the solution, but there is also a lot of information out there that suggests that when you focus on time of use, people are less concerned with how much they use. And I think that that's a critical issue. It doesn't mean it has to be that way, but that's what past experience has shown us. And if we want to use both time of use and other means of changing behavior, then we need to find out an effective way of doing that. And I don't think that we have yet.
I think one of the things, and thank you very much for coming. I'm just going to quickly wrap up. One of the things that hadn't really occurred to me before this discussion, and I'm very, very appreciative of the panel for having really kind of gotten into it a bit, and also to Benjamin Lennett and Bincy Neenan and James Losey of the Open Technology Initiative, who really spent a tremendous amount of time digging through this information and making this such a rich discussion, as well as Jerry Richmond, whose blog you should visit. What I want to say is that I don't think it had occurred to me before this discussion that really putting a smart meter on someone's house is not changing their electrical meter. It is actually putting that computer on their desk in 1981 and saying, you don't know, but it's going to change your life. I mean, when you look at your phone, think of all of your feelings about your phone. You've got, for one thing, extra expenses with your phone. You've got a whole different relationship to a new utility with a phone. You've got extra harassment all day long and all night long of getting all these damn emails, and you have a completely different relationship to the phone than we had back in 1980. And in some ways, what the smart meter on the side of your house is starting to do is getting you in a constant dialogue with electrical pricing and with your appliances, but it also raises a bunch of other questions about fairness, about if we're just thinking about these as meters, we don't think about, gosh, we need to have credit or we need to have very large programs for moving very efficient appliances out into the homes of the poorest and lower middle income and even middle income. I mean, there need to be a whole set of policies in place, as well as a whole sort of federal understanding of the relationship between the front end of the smart grid on the side of the house and the back end of the smart grid with all of those capacitors and other things that have to be installed all the way along to get the benefits. So I think in some ways this has opened up this whole discussion into kind of both a broader social realm and as well as a technical realm. Does anybody have anything they want to say in ending?
Yeah, I think those are very interesting comments that you just made, and would just add that the reminder, everyone already knows, but the computer on your desk in 1981, your cell phone, semiconductors in various products. You know, we've seen the beginnings of new technologies that advance. Electricity, we should always bear in mind, is a unique service. It's a monopoly service. There are no choices that consumers have. You live in a franchise service territory in most cases. There is no choice to go to another cell phone. You can't choose to push the computer off your desk. It's a necessity of life. It's a matter of life and death for some people. So comparing it apples to these other emerging technologies can be problematic, and would just leave with that thought.
I'd make one last statement. Smart meter is all about choice, putting the customer in control. And if you got anything out of today's discussion, no matter how garbled it was, that's what this is all about. This is a substantial game-changing technology. So when we were asked the question earlier, I truly believe it. The meter is a computer, two-way communication with the customer, eventually two-way communication with appliances. The distribution system that goes with it will enable a whole new set of technology. This is a game changer, but it puts the customer in charge.
And who knows where it will lead 20 years down the road. Perhaps consumers really will actually shop for power outside of monopolies, and then it will truly be a game changer. Okay, thank you very much to our panelists. And thank you very much.